All right, and we are back. Welcome into another episode of Keeping Up with the New York Jets. Today is Wednesday, August 7th. Almost stumbled there because we're usually Thursdays. Alongside Teddy Pristash, I am Blake Pace. We've got a boring week. I hate to say that as we're introducing the show, but there's, a few training camp storylines. We do have preseason game one coming up on Saturday, so we're talking all the news and notes from training camp, the first depth chart, and what we want to see in that game. So I'll tell you, it's gonna be a very fun, boring episode today.
There you
Let me do a better sales pitch there. Before I bring Teddy in, make sure to follow us on our socials at KUWTNYJ. Teddy is at Teddy Huncho. I am at Spring Blake. Theodore, 30 days till the NFL season. How are we feeling?
feeling good, man. I mean, I'm getting over that hump of like scared to be excited. Now I'm starting to get excited, which is a
You are.
scary thing,
Yeah.
but here I go. You know, it's been good to just see the Jets practicing for like a couple weeks now. And I don't think you're totally wrong. Like, we're kind of the week before the first preseason game. To me, like the Hall of Fame game is such a tease because then you have to wait a whole nother,
Mhm.
like 10 days before
Yeah.
you actually get to like the weekend. But um yeah, I don't know. I can only imagine what it's like to be like the actual Jets players in the actual building. They got to be getting amped up this week to
Yeah.
actually play another, like play a game, whether it's a
Right.
preseason game or not, they get to put on the pads, play another uniform. So that should be fun. I'm feeling good.
Good. Good. Yeah, it's football's fully consumed. Like it's back in consuming my life morning tonight. We had our Dynasty rookie draft yesterday, which was very
Yep.
fun and exciting. And I don't know, everything is just being consumed by football. It feels very welcoming. I'm ready to just fast forward the next 30 days. But before we get there, we've got a few things going on in the world of Jets camp. I think the biggest news of the last week, and it's really just the last few days, was starting left tackle Tyrone Smith missed practices on Saturday and Monday. They didn't practice Sunday. Saturday was also the green and white scrimmage. They were labeled vet rest days, but then according to Robert Saleh, said he was dealing with tightness. He did return to practice on Tuesday, no team drills, but I just got uh, Will PA, what's that dude's name? Willie
Will
PA?
Parkinson,
Yeah, yep. He just said that according to
something like
Robert
that.
Saleh, he is just being eased into, team drills after missing a few days. So it just seems
Sure.
like vet stuff that you want to do with a left tackle that's aging and dealt with injuries. You don't want to fully rush him back in after he misses a few days, and also you want to give him a few days off in training camp. So could have been a little worrisome, but something that, avoids any
Yeah,
serious drama.
it's been a funny little like thing on Twitter because I think it was Connor Hughes or one of the big beat guys that tweeted, like this is concerning, like Tyron Smith misses
Yeah.
another day.
Yeah, it was huge.
Which it seems like they weren't necessarily planned from the beginning, that he would miss these days. But it is good to hear that it's like nothing too serious. I mean, at the end of the day, we want our linemen out there together playing in the actual games.
Yeah.
So, if Tyron Smith doesn't get to practice every day in training camp, it's not the end of the world. But I think it's just like that rash panic that we all have where it's like, oh my God, he's not practicing. Like, what's wrong? Is he injured? You know what I mean? But it seems like that'll all be okay.
Well, we're also haunted by the last few off seasons where it
Sure.
was like Dwayne Brown all of a sudden you were like, wait, we're not going to have him for the first month of the season. Just like from the clouds, it came out that
Yeah.
that was happening. You had Mackay that was slowly working his way in as well too. So anytime that you have an offensive lineman missing a practice or sitting out of team drills, we're going to have a heightened sense of urgency. So glad to see that he'll all be there. It'll be interesting to see how they handle him the rest of this week with the Commanders coming into town. Sticking on the offensive line, another note, another bad day or so, a few bad snaps from Joe Tippmann. The biggest one that was highlighted in the green and white scrimmage sailed over Rodgers' head. Rodgers, of course, then you see him running 20 yards back to get the football. I don't know about you. To me, like, the one thing that was funny is I was more so just didn't love watching Rodgers have to sprint 20 yards back. I was like, your precious legs, please don't move. I feel like I just am like, so like, that was the part I hated most about that. I don't really like, it just seems to be a talking point because there aren't a lot of talking points in Jets camp right now. Any thoughts to you about the
Yeah,
Tittman developments?
I mean, that's fair. It definitely, we talked about this a few days ago when it was, or last week when it was a like also big story that
Two
You know,
bad
he was
practices. Yeah.
yeah, like a couple bad snaps, and we had kind of said, like it's just something you don't want to see continue to happen. So then when you start to see those tweets and hear that that's what was going on, it's not the best thing to hear. But I still hold true. Like generally, he's been fine. Like today, someone in their training camp notes was like, no bad snaps today. And we've seen Tippmann play center before, and I don't remember it being a huge issue last year.
It wasn't at all.
So I'm not super worried about it. You know what I mean? But you're right. This is just where we are in camp. It's just hard. There's not a ton of stuff to talk about, right?
Camp is meant to nitpick everything because
Yeah,
you have this idea that you want this perfect roster, and so all of a sudden you're sitting here saying our center can't get the ball to the quarterback in the right way, and yeah, it's you're gonna nitpick everything here in these first few weeks, but we also have to still remember that even in week 2 now of training camp, it's still week 2 of like there are teams in week 4 of the regular season that still are getting their feet under them. It's
sure.
expected that not everything is going to be perfect this early on. But you're right. When it's the only football content we get to enjoy on a daily basis, you're going to hear about every storyline that comes out of camp. Speaking of on the flip side, stories that we haven't heard, crickets on Hassan Reddick. I don't know if you're seeing stuff that I'm not. Last week when we came here, Josina Anderson had reported that they were making steps in the right direction. I haven't heard or seen a single thing since. It went deafening.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two ways to look at this, right? It's that either they've hit this stall, and nothing's happening, or it's like they're actually making moves and are just staying, tight about it and not letting anything leak. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but maybe the optimism in me wants to look at it that way. I am getting to the point where like I'm not truly worried that he's not going to be here week 1, but I'm just like, can we just get this over with,
Yeah.
2 weeks ago when we recorded this podcast, we had said, it's possible that it gets done as early as next week, right? And then you got the Josina Anderson reports. There was news it would be done on Monday. He would show up. He didn't. We recorded our podcast. Again, I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if a week from now he's there. You're completely correct. Absolutely no news there. Like no update, no nothing. So now it's just like, what's gonna happen, and still like maybe it's when that first game fine comes in, oh, you weren't here for a preseason game, like I'm not sure exactly the number there, but it's more than a practice fine. Maybe that's what like wakes him up, but it's just like, just get this deal done. And I say that I don't want the Jets to like give too much ground and give him this huge deal, like that's not what I'm saying, but it's just killing me. Like I just want this guy to be on our team. He will shore up our D line so well that, like, looking at it without him, it's maybe not the greatest. It doesn't give you the most confidence, like looking at the depth and looking at the pieces that we have, that we're going to be this elite D line we've been hyped up to be. So yeah, really just getting a little frustrated that I don't hear anything, but
Yeah.
Still end of the day, I think he'll be around.
Yeah, I would have said by the end of last week I was like, give him 10, 14 days. Once that number creeps over 1 million, that's when I was like, oh, he'll come to his senses by then. And the fact is, he's like, nope. And the fact that he's reporting to just like if there was, some news of him getting closer to a deal being done,
Sure.
I'd be like, okay, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, but he might be willing to take this thing on right up to the regular season.
It's just so, yeah, and it's just such a horrible look, like to trade for a player and then to not have him in that building. It's just it's not a good situation. It really isn't.
It's a 1 week salary for each preseason game missed.
Yeah, it's like a
So
game check.
1/18 of their salary.
Yeah,
He's got to show up soon. I mean, it's if the Jets bump up his pay, I'm sure for this year he could probably look at that as recouping things. But I don't get it. You're right. It is getting to that point where you're like, I think it's the fact that we heard stuff in the right direction and then crickets where I'm like, okay, what actually happened then? What
right.
was Josina hearing? What happened since then? It's gotten very murky.
It gets to that point where it's like, if we haven't resolved it by now, what is going to be that like cherry on top of the deal that really does get it resolved? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And obviously at the end of the day, like we want Hassan Reddick on the field playing football for the Jets,
100%.
but we also don't want to be able to be like taken hostage and just forced to do whatever this guy wants because he doesn't want
Right.
to show up, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm sure Joe Douglas and the boys are trying to balance that line as best they can. But I mean, from my perspective as a fan, it's just like I just want to see this guy show up, you know, get that clip on Twitter,
Right.
um, you know, get to hear the boys in the press conferences be like, hey, you know, it's all business. He's here now, and
Yeah.
then we can just move on.
Yep. Be done with it for good. So, only other thing newsworthy, joint practices start. Like you mentioned, the Jets players are probably going to be really excited to hit somebody that's not their own teammates for the first time in a couple of weeks. I think they had a pretty chippy practice today when we're recording this on
Yep,
Tuesday. So,
3 fights.
um, you can definitely tell that things are starting to escalate, and not to say that they won't when you've got other teams coming in. It will probably even more so be the case, but being able to hit somebody else for the first time will always be a welcome for the Jets defense, for the Jets offensive line. So we'll get a couple of practices in here before the preseason game Saturday morning, and I guess it's just that step it's the next step as we gear toward the regular season.
Are we at a point now where like every team does joint practices?
Just about all of them.
Because I knew they were a thing, you know, and before Robert Saleh, the Jets certainly participated in them every once in a while. But it does seem like in the Robert Saleh years, we've done it with at least one, if not two, most years, two other teams that we do like a few days of practices with before we have that preseason game. I mean, I just think that's a really like interesting thing to throw into the middle of training camp, right? Like all of a sudden these Jets players are going to get, you know, two practices against the team that they're going to play on Saturday. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's really cool and it's obviously a good thing to do. And Salah obviously loves it, but it does kind of seem like
It's the
most
new
teams
fad.
do it now. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that I think of it, and there's only two teams that aren't doing it this year. So there's the Chiefs and
Interesting.
the Raiders,
They
and
should link up. They probably hate each
yeah,
other
they do
though.
hate each other. They did that weird Kermit the Frog thing. Did you
Yeah.
see that? Oh my God,
Yes.
so weird of them. But yeah, there's 22 different joint practices, so some teams are even doing multiple now. But you're right. I think what's the reason that it's starting to become such a new trend is the fact that you aren't playing guys in the preseason games as
Sure.
much anymore.
Sure.
So it is giving
Aaron Rodgers gets
Aaron
to
Rodgers
see.
snaps against other defenses. While, yes, he's still not being hit, but he's also not going up against the Jets defense for the 20th time in a row. So
Yeah.
I think it's just a good way to limit having to put guys out there in the preseason games, but also make sure that your guys are getting reps against somebody that's not your defense. Now, in the Jets case, it's probably harder for Rodgers to go against the Jets defense than it will be the Commanders. That's just,
Yeah.
they're in
I
that
think it's
situation where the Commanders are a bad football team, but
sure.
something different is at least refreshing.
Yeah, and you know, a big thing with like practices when you're playing your own team is a lot of times, you know, the plays are scripted.
Yeah,
So at some point, you know, the head coach can say, "Hey, don't run this defense here because we want to see what it looks like against this defense." You know,
right.
where I think these joint practices really give that opportunity for the play callers to say, "Hey, this is going to be a, you know, 10 play
Yeah,
live series. Like, go out there and just call plays." You know, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic.
yeah,
Hopefully,
yeah.
our man Nate Hackett can get some reps in calling
Is
plays.
is he calling plays? Save that.
I
Save that
would
for
assume
Saturday.
so. I would assume so. I don't know who else is going to call plays,
Yeah.
but yeah,
All right. Well, Teddy, they also put out the first unofficial depth chart, which is always a weird way to phrase it to
love
me
these.
because it is official because it is the Jets putting it out, but it's also they like to call it unofficial. I just like it is the official depth chart because you're the Jets and you're the ones putting it out.
Yeah, but I'm
Put your mind in
pretty
the pretzel
sure
there, huh?
there's like it says on the website, the unofficial depth chart is compiled by the New York Jets communications department. So now that doesn't mean they're the ones assigning the players. They might be given a depth chart,
Yeah.
but the idea that they don't tag it from like the coaches or the staff, they tag it from the communications department is interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I think what's important with these, like, how many times do you see, first unofficial depth chart came out and, this rookie is listed at
Bo
number 2.
Nix is QB3 in
Yeah,
Denver right now,
sure.
behind Zach Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah, or I'm trying to think of a couple for us that we've had, but none are coming to mind. But like, I think Sauce Gardner was like a backup on our first, or
Yeah,
like
he
something
was.
like that. You know what
He
I mean?
was.
So I
Yeah.
think that's another reason why they give it that tag. It's not necessarily the depth chart that they're going out with every day. Um, but it's fun. It gives you some insight into where these guys stand. Um, not a whole ton of surprises to me.
Mm-mm.
Um, I don't know where you want to start. To me, the first thing that jumped out when I looked at this, was Xavier Gibson at slot over Malachi Corley.
Yeah.
That may be a little bit of a, rookie situation, but I think a lot of us would expect Malachi Corley to be our starting slot guy, starting third receiver. What say you?
It's one of those situations that's tough because you were missing Gibson for parts here to the season. So you're like, okay, well, this
Sure.
is more reps for Malachi to just take it away. But also, Gibson, it could very well be one of those situations like they did with Sauce and Garrett Wilson and these younger guys where they're like, nope, we're just going to start off first unofficial, put you behind. You got to earn that spot above. But I don't know. I don't see anything crazy from Malachi Corley where he's like, he can't be
Sure.
on the field. Like, to me, when you got him, he was more of a project because you
Yeah.
want someone in the slot typically to be a better route runner. And yeah, I'm sure as the season goes on, he would carve into that role, but I don't think Gibson has done anything necessarily to lose that job outside of not
Being
being
hurt.
available.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know. It could very well be one of those things where a couple strong preseason games, continued reps in practice, he's all of a sudden the starting slot. But I also could see reason for him as a player that he
Sure.
wouldn't necessarily be on the field that early.
He was a third round pick, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Malachi Corley?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could very well be one of those situations, right, where us as fans get all this hype for this guy. We want to see him out there. And then
Right.
the Jets just say, hey, we are more confident with Xavier Gibson. I do think it's something to watch because we could, get through that first game week 1 against the 49ers. And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, like I thought Malachi Corley was going to play a ton. He only played 4 snaps, like
Mm-hmm.
we've had those kind of conversations before. Um, but that's just an interesting one to watch, right? Because it's two players who, it both kind of makes sense for them to get that role. But, I would prefer that the guy we drafted really steps up and earns it and is,
Yeah.
we can't keep him off the field. But you are right. Maybe that there's some, just growing pains there. Needs to work a little to really become an NFL receiver.
Yeah. I think like it's not like you took Malik Neighbors at 6 or it's a
Right.
third round guy and
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
a third round guy in a draft class where I believe probably what 10, 11, 12 receivers went before him too. So you're also talking like third round, but you're also talking a guy that was like way far down on the list of
Sure.
receivers taken. So of course you want him to be out there and hopefully if he's got, enough development in the next few weeks, he could be, but I don't know. I see a world where Gibson still has a strong part in this offense on the inside. Now you're talking a wide receiver 3 role. You're not putting him, second in targets to Garrett Wilson, but I don't know. I don't think his story's done just yet.
Yeah. Only other quick note on the wide receivers is, Mike Williams still injured, just listed as 5th, so Alan Lazard gets that starting role. Um, can't wait for Mike Williams to be back. That's all
Yeah,
I'll say.
that'll be nice. I mean, hey, dude, the summer of Alan Lazard. He still has a
Oh
few
yeah,
good
don't get me wrong.
practices there.
Yeah,
Rodgers wants to make him look real good. Yeah, I think the other thing with wide receiver is at the end there, having Jason Brownlee behind Irv Charles on the depth chart doesn't really spell
Yeah.
well for Brownlee because Irv is kind of providing a bigger role on special teams than Brownlee is. So, like I said, we're talking end of rooms that won't see much play time, but we have talked about Brownlee since last training camp, and it seems
Definitely.
like he is kind of losing a little bit of a spot on the roster here.
Yeah, it does seem like he could potentially be that odd man out, get the cut. I think it just really does go to show like how important special teams is for these,
Oh yeah.
fifth, sixth receiver types. Because you look at, Brownlee and Xavier Gibson, both undrafted guys, both made the team, both were these incredible stories. Brownlee was a non-factor last year, all in all, didn't really do much, didn't get a lot of reps. Then you look at Xavier Gibson, not necessarily, a ton of reps offensively. He was out there for sure, but not like he was like an every down player.
Yeah.
But he gives that influence on, punt return, kick return, all those different things. And now here he is, listed as a starting receiver. So it can just go to show you how important special teams is. Then you see a guy like Irv Charles beating out Brownlee, who, was this miracle to make the team last year. So I would agree with you. I think Brownlee probably not going to make the team, but we'll keep an eye on it.
Yep. Yeah. Everything on the offensive line looked as we expected. Linebacker, secondary. Stigger's in there as number 3, which is pretty cool. Shout out to him. Of course, still not a ton of competition out there. It was interesting to see Brandon Eccles on the outside part of the depth chart where he was kind of primarily the backup slot guy
corner
last year. So just, I guess that's a small note. And then, the edge room, again, Hassan Reddick will be playing at some point. I'm going to knock on wood. But they did put Michael Clemmons in as the number 2 edge next to Jermaine Johnson, with Will McDonald behind Jermaine at the number 3 spot. Number 4 at edge was Tack McKinley, the former first-round pick out of Atlanta. I think it makes sense when you look at it, and I put this as my main note. An edge that weighs 235 pounds can't be listed as the starter because he will get swallowed whole in the run game. That's just...
he's not going to be playing first, second,
he's not first and second down. So when you're putting out your starting 4, like Jermaine has the build where he's that 3-down player. Will McDonald is going to be a rotational piece, a wide 9, pin your ears back, get to the quarterback. So it shouldn't be surprising that on the depth chart they go with Clemmons. Hopefully that eventually becomes Reddick and Will McDonald behind him. But interesting to see out of Clemmons. We talked about him a little bit last week as well too. So anything with the edge room? Anything else on the depth chart that really stood out to you?
I agree with you with the edges. Will McDonald, he just can't be that starting 3-down edge. I will say, past couple practices, there's been more pop about it, more positive plays.
That's good.
So hopefully he could do something, but that worry there, even without this upcoming season, like just kind of not the pick you wanted as your first round draft pick. But hopefully he can make some waves. But yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, but it's kind of like you just got to move on with what you have. Like we've talked about, I don't love Michael Clemmons as our starting guy, but hopefully that gets replaced with Hassan Reddick. So
yeah, exactly. All right, so let's move to the preseason game, Ted. We're kind of grooving along here. I guess just things that we're keeping an eye on for the preseason game. I don't know. To me, there's always the same storylines. The rookies, we've talked about the rookies every week, and that's going to be the same thing throughout everything we talk about with training camp. We want to see how Braylon Allen runs behind the offensive line. We want to see how Olu looks, because I would assume, much like Aaron Rodgers, you're not really putting Tyron Smith out there in any of the preseason action. At least I wouldn't, given his injury history and importance to the team. So we want to see Olu. We want to see Corley. We want to see the young DBs.
Yeah, I think
that's always a
different than previous years, though. Like last year, right, with like Sauce and Garrett and kind of Jermaine, but I won't really put him in there. I guess this would be 2 years ago. And Breece Hall. You have these players you're excited for, and you're like, oh, they're rookies. It's the first preseason game, but they were all projected starters. So it's like even they weren't really out there playing. This, I do think most likely, we see a lot of Fashanu. We see a lot of Corley. Adrian Martinez, the UFL quarterback, like it will be fun to kind of see some of these guys actually play. I know I just threw him in there.
Yeah.
It'll be awesome to get to see Braylon Allen, be that running back 1 for a preseason game, whether it's, 1-2 drives or whatever it's going to be. That'll be fun. I'll be on a bachelor party this weekend. Won't get to watch the game live, but I'm going to watch it on Sunday. But yeah, it's a preseason game. You're right about the rookies, but I do think it's at least exciting. We'll get to see them get some more reps, as opposed to if they were shoo-in starters, they probably wouldn't even be suiting up.
Right, exactly. And speaking of that, because we're talking about the starters or even veterans, one of my favorite things every preseason game I say is don't play them. Who is the most veteran player that you would want out there getting reps in preseason game
It's a
one?
good question. It's a good question. I don't
I'm
even
gonna look at the
know,
depth chart
dude.
too. Who
Like,
on the depth chart do I say I still want to see snaps from in preseason game one?
looking just at the starters offensively, like I wouldn't want to see Garrett Wilson.
Nope.
Why? Just this list I'm looking at doesn't have Tyler Conklin at tight end, which
They've got two tight ends if you scroll down a little bit.
there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So like Jeremy Rucker, like go ahead and play him. I don't care.
Yep.
Really, none of the O line I would want to play.
Even Tipman, because that's a second-year player.
Yeah, no, you can like, and I'm not saying they're not going to play any of them. I think
Right.
Tyrone Smith and Morgan Moses will probably definitely not play.
Right, not.
AVT, I would assume you're not going to play just because of the injury concerns.
Yeah.
Then you have John Simpson, who is a veteran player. It's not like he hasn't been around. So yeah, it's like maybe him, and then Tittman. Tittman makes some sense. Get him some game reps, but it's just I don't want to see any of these guys get hurt, right?
Yeah.
Then you look at the receiver room, like sure you could throw Alan Lazard out there.
Lazard can he's earned it.
But is it really like he's been in the league 6-7 years?
I think it's punishment for what he did last season.
Yeah,
I think it's punishment. You have to play all offensive snaps are played by Alan Lazard.
And then we've talked about it, right? Like Tyrod Taylor, it would make a lot of sense, hey, he's our backup, we're going to put him in, but I don't think they even want to risk that, right? So he's not even going to play. Then you look defensively, like, would they throw Jermaine Johnson out there? Is there any point to do that?
I don't see a point, no.
Yeah. Quinnen's not going to play. Javon Kinlaw, maybe.
That's where
maybe.
He's the most vet guy. I want to see Javon Kinlaw, Michael Clemmons.
You can keep Jamie Sherwood out there, who's having a banger camp. Jamie Sherwood, a guy I've been banging the drum for years. Had a really good season last year. CJ, you're not playing. Quincy, you're not playing. None of the starting three cornerbacks I'd play, and I wouldn't play really either of the safeties with injury concerns. So
yeah, the most veteran player that I think we chose on that list was Alan Lazard and Javon Kinlaw. Kinlaw also in his 5th season. So yeah, that's a fun.
We really are getting to that point, right? Where like preseason games, back in the day, it would be like the starters are going to play a quarter or the starters are going to play a half.
Yeah.
Like now you get a drive,
one drive.
And like this year, it's like, don't even give them a drive. Like,
didn't Rodgers do one drive the entire preseason against the Giants?
Yeah. And he
talked trash to that guy. He talked shit. He was like, I don't even know who you are.
Yeah.
He did one drive. Yeah, it's just gotten to that point. It's not worth it. Because I think the biggest reason why is because the league has noticed that the gap between the first and the worst team isn't as crazy, or even at least like a playoff contender to the worst team in the league isn't that big of a gap. So everybody's kind of just decided, let's ease into the season weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4, because record-wise, if we're going to be a good team, the separation between winning the division and the wild card might be a game. Like there's not that huge gap. So it's just, there's no point in, you don't need to show up to week 1 of the NFL season being at your A game, which we'd like to all think that they would be, but they've had this approach of like, well, let's just use the first 3 weeks of the season as our preseason, basically.
Yeah, no, I mean, it won't be surprising. But there's enough fun guys to get you through, seeing like Quantez Stiggers will be a fun guy to watch. Will McDonald would maybe be a guy to watch. Braylon Allen,
I'd want to watch
guys,
Will.
Like,
yeah.
So it'll still be interesting and worth the watch, I think, like as Jets people. But preseason has, whatever luster it did have, 15 years ago that at least got you somewhat excited. Like now, it's really just, it's a hard thing to like you're like, oh, it's our first game. And really, you're just not going to see starters.
No,
Like
you're
I
not.
wouldn't be surprised if Garrett Wilson doesn't take a snap. I wouldn't be
Yeah, why would
surprised
he?
if
Why
right.
would he?
It's one thing when you're a rookie or a second year player, but at this point, what are you throwing them out there for?
Especially if your quarterback isn't going to be there. What's the point of
Yeah,
having
yeah,
Garrett Wilson catch balls from Tyrod Taylor? Now, of course, at
yeah.
and they do during practices, but like, what's the point? So I totally agree.
Quick, interesting note.
Yeah,
Not note. Question. Um, like we had the conversation, right? It's like, why would the Jets play Aaron Rodgers? They're obviously not going to. In that interview or whatever, Aaron Rodgers was like, oh, well, that's news to me, right? That he wasn't going to play in the first 2 preseason games. Is it a little odd that they didn't just say the preseason instead of the first 2 preseason games? You know what I mean?
I didn't think about it like that. I didn't even
Because
think
like
about it.
to us, it's obvious, right? It's like he's not going to play, and I don't think he's going to play.
No, I don't think so either.
But I do think it's just a little like, are they maybe playing with this idea that they'll give him another drive, which
They
wouldn't be the end of the world, but it's just
no.
it's not going to happen.
Well, it wouldn't be the end of the world, and I would also assume that Rodgers. I would assume that players want that a little bit, right? Like you at least
To
want
play,
just a little bit,
yeah,
just so
yeah,
like your
definitely.
first, just so you're not like your first snap is fucking 49ers Monday Night Football.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
got a defensive
No,
back breathing.
1000%, 1000%. Yes, and I think that's something where like you think about that one drive that we had Aaron Rodgers, right? And it was 3-4 plays, and basically every play was just like the line getting blown up and him getting fucked up and having to throw the ball away. Like part of that is like, yeah, these guys are just kind of going at. It's kind of like when and don't get me wrong, these guys practice. I'm not saying that, but it's like when I go play golf, I haven't swung in
Yeah,
how since the last time I played golf.
yeah,
And so my first swing is that drive on the first tee, and then my first putt is on the green, trying to
right.
make an important putt. It's like that feeling of maybe I can just get my feet under me certainly is there, but I mean, you do have to look at it like a guy like Aaron Rodgers. He's been in the league 20 years. There's been plenty of preseasons he didn't play a snap. It's not like
Yeah.
it's like this huge big thing.
Even
Yeah,
more so though for this year than opposed to last year. He's had 5 snaps of football in the last year and a half. So
yeah,
like go
yeah.
until the end of the 2022 season, he has only gotten 5 snaps of actual live football. So yeah, maybe they are toying around with the idea of one drive in preseason game 3. They're probably all very scarred of the idea of it, but yeah,
Yeah.
it would make sense for Rodgers to want or need that as well too. I'd be worried if my first snap of regular season football, Morgan Moses gets beat by Nick Bosa, and all of a sudden I have to like sprint 5 yards out and make a throw at
Literally.
the last
It's
second.
like, dude, give yourself up. Like, don't get
Yeah,
sacked. Like,
get down, go down, go down. God, we
yeah.
are gonna be so. This is just like all making me think of how like paranoid we're gonna be with Aaron Rodgers this season.
And it's I have been paranoid all off season. I can't enjoy this the same way because of what happened last year. The fact that again we have to wait until Monday night. We get to watch 30 other teams play fucking football before we get to watch the Jets again. Like that was hell last
Oh
year. Just
God.
not Sunday's awesome, right? First Sunday with football back, but it's like I just want to watch my team. Like, why couldn't they have just let us play at 1 p.m.? Why couldn't But it'll be fun.
Torturous.
Let's go out there
Yeah.
and get that
It
win
is gonna be fun. God, it's gonna be tense.
in San Francisco.
Tense on Monday night.
Yeah. Yeah. How many times are they going to show that replay? You know what I mean?
The
We're
replay, the
gonna
walking out with the flag.
we're
I
gonna see it a
mean,
lot, especially the whole week going
yeah, the
up
whole
to
week
it.
leading up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I kind of combined of what I want to watch for the preseason, what the depth chart also made me realize is like I don't have total confidence that the Jets fixed their interior offensive line. And now we know the starters. We know John Simpson. We know Tippmann at center, AVT at right guard. So you're like, we have those starters there, but just like looking at the bench options and seeing Wes Schweitzer, who we saw for a few games last year, Chris Glasser, and Jake Hansen. I apologize to those final two, not familiar with your game all that much. What it's just made me realize is like, at right guard, we have AVT. You know who we lost the last 2 seasons to really serious injuries? AVT. Joe Tippmann. Fine young player, hopefully gets better with every game, but still a young center that we aren't really sure. Like, okay, is this our starting center for the long-term future? Still remains to be seen. And then John Simpson, like, as much as we like to pretend it's a different situation, he came to us in kind of the same exact mold as Laken Tomlinson did a few years ago, where it was like,
Sure.
oh, this left guard just came out onto the scene and had 1 year of amazing play. Let's give him a big contract and come in, and he'll be our star left guard for the Jets. That didn't work out with Laken. He was abysmal for the majority of his tenure with the Jets. So yeah, one thing that I want to watch in this preseason is, maybe we do put out a John Simpson there for a little bit. Maybe we put out those three. Maybe not AVT, but you get Tippmann out there, John Simpson. I want to see how those guys perform. I also want to see how the bench guys perform as well too, because I feel comfortable, like with the tackle depth. We talk about, oh well, there's Olu back there. We've got the future franchise tackle if Tyrone Smith has to miss action. Or maybe if Morgan Moses does, you can slide him over there a little bit, even though they haven't done that necessarily this training camp. There's a guy that we can hang our hat on. We lose one of these interior guys, and we're essentially saying, like, we're kind of fucked again on the inside.
Yeah. It's a fair point, for sure. I think if you go around the league and look at, backup guards and centers,
yeah. No,
I
you're
don't
right.
think you'd feel great about anyone's room. But yeah, I mean, I think for us, right, like, I think your biggest concern really comes from those two guard positions and thinking, what if AVT doesn't pan out and is just this injury prone player? What if John Simpson is this Lincoln Tomlinson mold? Which are fair, for sure. My only thought, optimistic rebuttal is like, compared to where we've been, last year we felt okay about our offensive line. This offensive line, I feel much more okay about,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like, wanting this perfect O-line is so hard to come by.
Yeah.
But I think you're right? Like, watching these guys will be important because what team makes it through the year without, some backup linemen playing? None,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So certainly some of these guys that we see play this Saturday will be there at some point in the season. And yeah, hopefully Wes Schweitzer and Chris Glazer and Jake Hansen can actually play a little ball.
Yeah.
Jake
Yeah.
Hansen, I'm thinking of Chris Hansen, red zone
Yes.
guy. Scott Hansen.
Scott Hansen, Chris Hansen.
Chris Hansen, the catch a predator guy?
I think that is Chris Hansen.
Yeah, that's definitely
Chris
it.
Hansen.
So we
I
got the
think
big
so.
three: Chris, Jake, and Scott.
Welcome
All
to
just
Keeping Up with the New York
super
Jets. All
guys.
making their Keeping Up with the New York Jets debut.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think where it comes down to is I agree. On paper, if you put those five
Yeah.
names and say that's the combination we've got, awesome. It's another thing to still see them all take form for the first time together as an offensive line. And
Certainly.
specifically on the interior, there are more reasons to push back on it being great. Like the tackles, I can push back and say when Tyrone Smith is on the field and healthy, one of the best left tackles in football. When Morgan Moses is healthy and out there on the football field, he's usually a really reliable right tackle. John Simpson, we saw one good year in his 5-year career. ABT, great when he's healthy. Can't really depend on that. Tippmann remains to be seen. So that's kind of just where, like, things to look for. I just am very curious what the interior line looks like. The only other thing I had is who's play calling? Who's calling the plays there?
Yeah, that is interesting, I think. To me, though, I do like, with Aaron Rodgers healthy, I very much expect it to be Nathaniel Hackett.
Yeah.
For two reasons, right? The first is the relationship with Aaron Rodgers. you trust that Aaron Rodgers is just going to be like changing the play up anyway. Which again, I hate that that's our like excuse for our play caller, but it is
But
what it is.
yeah, he's
But it seems like it does make sense to continue having him be the play caller. He's the guy that Aaron wanted to be here. He's the guy that has been hired for the job, and the Jets have
right.
failed in their attempts to replace him. It's also one of those things where like, who else would do it? Do you look to Todd Downing, who is the
Yeah.
current passing game coordinator, who's like not the most well-liked guy around the league?
No,
Like
he's
I feel
not.
like he's had some issues. You're
Was a
definitely not going to
former
give it.
offensive coordinator though. He
Yeah,
has
that's
experience
fair.
calling plays
That's
at
fair.
least.
Uh, yeah, so maybe. How easy do you think it is to decipher who is calling plays in a preseason game? Easy? Well, will they talk about it? I mean, I'm sure it'll get asked about after the game in the press conference, but during the game, will I be able to say, hey, look, that's Nathaniel Hackett calling plays?
I think so. I think they'll pan over to I think you'll be able
Yeah,
to see the
pull it back
sideline if
and
he's
should
talking.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not that
no,
that's
that'll be
something that most
interesting.
people are thinking, but maybe we'll see. And I'm just curious overall as well too, because like if we say that Aaron Rodgers is going to just change it up to whatever he wants, like, okay, when these other quarterbacks are in, I'm curious how
Right.
the red zone looks because not that, Rodgers can't change stuff, but the Jets were really bad in the red zone. And in his previous destination, when he was running the offense for the Broncos, he was abysmal in the red zone. So it's like those certain things. I'm
The
curious.
gold zone,
I'm like,
as
what
he
did you
calls it.
learn? Hackett? Like,
Yeah,
show me
definitely.
something new and fun and flashy when we get inside the 20, or just show me something in general. Don't show me run, pass on third down. I don't know.
Yeah,
He's
no, I'm
just
with you.
because, like I said, if Rodgers is there, we don't really have to worry about it that much. But also, like, I want to have faith in the offensive coordinator being able to call a competent offense.
Yeah, it's honestly a fair point. Like, if you see the Jets, score a couple touchdowns, then you do get some confidence back in
Yep.
Hackett, right? I,
Yeah.
I think, and it may have been the Zach Wilson effect. It may have
Very well
been
could have
like
been.
the lack of other good quarterbacks in the room effect, but we've seen plenty of, preseason games and real games, but I'll be focused on the preseason games where you're watching and it's, yeah, the Jets, they didn't score an offensive touchdown until their third string was out there. And it's just kind of like, is that the end of the world? No, it's a preseason game, but would I have liked to see them be able to score with the starters? Like, yes, that would have been great, So it's one of those type of things where, like, if we come out and we score 3 touchdowns, in the first half, it's like all of a sudden you're like, hey, maybe Hackett's doing an okay job. But right now he is really in the doghouse with all the fans.
Yep. Yeah. So hopefully we get to see better things from the offense. Hopefully we get to see good play from the line. These rookies, of course. Again, not the most exciting game of the week, but it is going to be Jets football, so we'll all be looking forward to it. Before we head out, you said the name Zach Wilson, and it reminded me of something that I wanted to talk about, and I might save it for next week if you haven't. Did you watch the clip of Bussin' with the Boys interviewing Randall Cobb about Zach Wilson?
I may have,
It
but
it was
it was a
it
few
flashed
weeks
like
ago.
last week or 2 weeks ago, but it talked about basically his entire saga and when he reportedly
Sure.
just would like told the team to like go fuck yourself. I'm not
Yeah.
playing for you guys, and they ended up putting like an injury designation on him. Just very funny. I didn't know if you had watched or not, but it was just like him kind of like dishing out what happened, but not. He was like, yeah, I don't want to talk too much about it, but yeah, shit was kind of messed up. They
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
told Zach that they were going to trade him in the offseason. And then a week later, we're like, hey, we actually need you to play. And then Zach Wilson was like, no, I'm injured. Just
Yeah.
chaos that happened
Yeah, they
last year.
kind
We're
of
all getting confirmation
confirmed
on.
all the crazy stuff
Exactly.
that, we thought was going down. Um, yeah, whatever.
Fun times. We don't
Dysfunction.
have to worry about it. But
Dysfunction.
oh, yeah. Yep. And hopefully, like everything else, Aaron Rodgers is the big old fat band aid to solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a world in which where like Rodgers plays out his career with the Jets, he retires, and then Joe Douglas is like, okay, now that Rodgers is gone, Saleh, get the fuck out of here. We are clearing
Yeah.
house. We're starting totally over.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I still love Salah, but
Yeah.
we shall see.
We shall see. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Again, on our socials at KUWTNYJ. If you're on the YouTube channel, make sure to hit a like. Make sure to hit subscribe. Refresh it 10 times so we get those views up. Teddy is at Teddy Huncho. I'm at Spring Blake. We might be talking to you next week. We might be talking to you after the preseason game. If not, we will have a week off because I am in Las Vegas with my family, but we'll be
Very
back
nice.
and even closer to the NFL season. So either Sunday or the week after, we will talk to you then. We appreciate you. We love you. Peace.